There's something about the things you can't say at work. Not the venting to a friend kind, the kind that lives behind your sternum for months, the thing you watched happen in a meeting and smiled through, the way you found out, too late, that someone who was supposed to protect you didn't. Maybe you've been there, sitting in a parking lot after a shift or staring at a job posting for a place you barely escaped thinking, someone should know what it's actually like in there. This is where those things go. What you're about to hear is real. Some of it is frustrating, some of it is quietly devastating, and some of it, I'll be honest, is the kind of thing that doesn't leave you right away. So, take a breath if you need one. The first one's waiting. The fluorescent light above my desk flickered every morning at exactly 8:47. I know that because I used to watch it, not because I had nothing to do. I had plenty to do. But because it was the one thing in that office that felt honest. Everything else was performing. The light just couldn't help it. My name is Delia. I was a client communications coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm called Hargrove & Payne. We handled freight contracts for retail distributors, which sounds dry until you realize that when something goes wrong in that chain, and something always goes wrong, it's your voice on the other end of the phone absorbing it. That was my job. Absorbing it. Translating panic into paperwork and calling it resolution. I had worked there for 2 years and 8 months. I know the exact number because I counted later in the parking garage, sitting in my car with the engine off. The building was one of those glass and steel structures that looks expensive from the outside and feels like a fishbowl from the inside. Everything was visible. That was the point. Open floor plan, no private offices except for the senior leadership team, whose glass-walled rooms lined the back of the 4th floor like terrariums. You could see them in there. They could see you. Nobody ever said it out loud, but you understood. Visibility was not the same as transparency. My routine was this. I parked on level 2 of the garage because level 3 smelled like something had died there once and never fully left. I took the elevator to 4, stopped at the coffee station by the east stairwell, not the main kitchen, the east one, because the main kitchen always had someone in it who wanted to talk about the weekend. And I made a cup of whatever the dark roast was that week. Then I walked to my desk, which was 3rd from the window in the 2nd row, and I put my bag on the left side, my coffee on the right, and I opened my email before I even sat down all the way. That was the ritual. It was small and it was mine. There were rules at Hargrove & Payne, the kind nobody writes down. You didn't email the VP of operations directly. You went through your manager, who went through the director, who may or may not pass it along depending on whether it made them look good. You didn't bring up staffing concerns during the quarterly all-hands because the all-hands wasn't for concerns. It was for the slideshow with the projected revenue numbers and the slide that said, "People first in a font that cost more than my monthly rent." And you smiled during that part. Everyone smiled. It was a reflex by then. I believed in the job once. I want to be honest about that because it's easy to rewrite the past so it all looks like a warning sign. But I genuinely liked the work. I was good at it. I had a 96% client satisfaction rating for 2 straight quarters, which my manager, Randall Fitch, mentioned in my performance review in the way you mentioned something you didn't expect to have to acknowledge, like he was surprised, like I'd done something slightly inconvenient by being good at my job. Randall was mid-50s, trim, with this habit of clicking his pen against his knuckle while you were talking to him. Not nervously, rhythmically, like he was keeping time to music only he could hear. He had an open door policy. It was written in the team handbook and printed on a little placard on his desk. The door was open, technically, but there was something about the way he looked up when you walked through it. Just a half-second delay, a kind of recalibration that made you feel like you had interrupted something important, even if he'd been sitting there doing nothing. I told myself that was just his style. I told myself that for 2 years and 8 months. It started with Mara. Mara Okonkwo was one of the other coordinators on my team. Sharp, meticulous, the kind of person who remembered the name of your client's assistant's assistant. She'd been at Hargrove & Payne for 4 years, longer than anyone else on our floor except for the woman in accounting who kept a space heater under her desk and didn't talk to anyone. In the span of 6 weeks that fall, Mara had submitted 3 separate requests for a schedule accommodation. Nothing radical, just a shift in her start time by 45 minutes for a medical thing she didn't owe anyone an explanation for. All 3 requests were denied. No reason given. Just denied in the system, like a form that didn't go through. Then Priya left, quietly on a Friday with a box and a handshake and an email from HR that said she was pursuing new opportunities. Priya had been flagging her workload for 2 months. I knew because she'd told me. I knew because I'd watched her eat lunch at her desk every single day for 6 weeks. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't afford to step away. And then Marcus, who sat 2 rows behind me, started coming in looking like he hadn't slept. He had that particular kind of tired that isn't about sleep. It's about something accumulating, something with no release valve. I kept a note on my phone, just observations, dates, patterns, things I noticed. I'm not sure why I did that. Maybe because I'd learned early that if you don't write it down, someone will tell you you imagined it. I requested a one-on-one with Randall for a Thursday. He moved it to the following Tuesday, then to Wednesday. Then it happened. A 20-minute block at 3:15 in the afternoon, in his glass-walled office at the back of the 4th floor. I had thought about what I was going to say. I'd practiced it in my car. I wasn't going to use the word morale because I knew how that landed. I wasn't going to make it personal. I was going to make it operational. Because that was the language that worked in that building. The language that got taken seriously. I sat down across from him. He was clicking his pen. I said, I wanted to bring something to your attention. Not as a complaint, more as a pattern I've been tracking. We've had significant turnover in the last 2 months. We have at least 2 team members who are visibly stretched past capacity. And I think if we don't address the workload distribution now, we're going to see it in the client numbers by Q1. He looked at me. He stopped clicking the pen for exactly 1 second. Then he said, Delia, you're a coordinator. Client satisfaction is your metric. Staffing is mine. I said, I understand that. The 2 things aren't separate. If the team is running this thin, the client experience degrades. I've seen it happen. He smiled. Not warmly. The way you smile at something that doesn't require a real response. He said, I appreciate that you care. I do. But I think you might be, and I say this gently, reading a little too much into normal fluctuation. People leave jobs. Workloads shift. That's the nature of this industry. And then he picked up the pen again. You know that feeling when you're talking and you can see in someone's eyes that they've already moved on, but you keep going anyway? Because stopping feels like admitting that you were never really in a conversation to begin with. I kept going. I said something about the accommodation requests, about how denying them without explanation sends a message to the team about what the company actually values. And he tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they're deciding whether to engage or simply wait for you to finish. He said, those decisions go through HR. That's above my level. It wasn't above his level. I knew that. He knew that I knew that. I said, okay, and I exhaled slowly. I smiled. I actually smiled at him. I gathered my notebook, I thanked him for his time, and I walked back out through the door that was always technically open. I don't know why I thanked him. I think it was automatic, like a reflex I hadn't managed to unlearn yet. I went to the bathroom on the 3rd floor, not the 4th because the 4th floor bathroom was too close to everything. And I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for about 30 seconds. Not for any dramatic reason, just because I needed to feel something that was real and simple and mine. Then I went back upstairs and opened a spreadsheet, like nothing happened. The week after that, I noticed I wasn't on the invite list for the Thursday sync. I assumed it was an oversight. I sent a quick note to Randall's assistant asking if I should add myself. She wrote back, Randall restructured the attendees for now. You're still looped in on the recap email. The recap email, which arrived on Fridays, summarizing decisions that had already been made. The week after that, Mara stopped asking me things. Not because she was cold, Mara was never cold, but because I think she could see something had shifted and she didn't know what it was, and neither did I. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone in that position is just not make them explain it. By the end of the month, my project assignments had been quietly narrowed, still busy, still technically full, but the accounts I was managing were smaller, older, less visible. The kind of portfolio you give someone when you're not sure what to do with them yet. There was one morning, a Wednesday, which still bothers me because nothing should feel worse on a Wednesday, but it did. When I walked past the main conference room and saw my team in there, all of them, including 2 people I'd never seen in that room before, and I realized the meeting had started, and I hadn't been told about it, and someone had moved the whiteboard to a different wall, which sounds like nothing, and is nothing, and I still think about it. I didn't say anything. I walked to the East Coffee Station. I made my dark roast. I went back to my desk and I opened my email and I started drafting a message to a recruiter who had reached out to me 6 weeks earlier, and who I had, at the time, politely declined. I didn't send it that day. I sat with it in my drafts for 11 days. But I knew, the way you know things before you're ready to say them out loud, that I had already started leaving. That the leaving had actually started the moment I walked out of that glass office with my notebook and my thank you that I didn't mean, and that everything after that was just the time it takes for the rest of you to catch up to the part of you that already knows. I drove past that building a few months ago. It's on a route I don't need to take, but sometimes I take it anyway. The glass still reflects everything around it. The sky, the traffic, the building across the street. You can't really see inside. You just see yourself looking. I'm still figuring out whether that's the point or whether it never had one. The hardest part isn't watching someone fail. It's watching someone choose to. I have to take a breath after that one, just a second, because there's a particular kind of tired that comes from seeing it clearly. No confusion. No wondering if you misread the room. Just the clean, quiet knowledge of what you witnessed. And here's where it gets complicated. Because the next person we're going to hear from, they weren't watching from the outside. They were inside it, building something, doing the work, checking every box that was supposed to mean something. Maybe you've been there. That moment when you realize the thing you were climbing toward, you're not even sure you recognize it anymore. That's where we're going. My name is Mara. I was Senior Account Coordinator, Strategic Development. That was my ritual. That was my armor. I actually believed that for a while. This is solid, Mara. But solid isn't what we're here for. I need you thinking 3 quarters ahead, not 1. I need you to want this as much as the clients do. Do you want this, Mara? Yes, absolutely. Do you want this, Mara? I had stopped wanting it. When I started going downstairs, going outside, sitting on the concrete lip of the building's fountain with a sandwich from the cart on the corner, people noticed. I thought, when is the last time something just happened to me? I didn't quit dramatically. I gave 8 weeks of notice. I trained my replacement. I cleaned out my desk on a Wednesday evening when most people had already left. I spent a lot of mornings not knowing what to do with myself. None of these things fixed anything. I'm not going to tell you I figured it out. I think it's more like you choose it. You choose the things that don't make your resume better and don't impress anyone in a conference room. I still have the piece of the bezel. It's just a thing that's mine, cracked and still here. That's enough, I think. That's enough. Some things don't leave right away. They just settle, find a lower shelf somewhere inside you and sit down without asking. I think what gets me, what I keep turning over, is how much we ask people to carry without ever calling it carrying. We build these structures, these systems, these places where people spend most of their waking hours, and somewhere in the design, we just forgot to account for the weight. Forgot that there's a person inside the role. That the role and the person are not the same thing, even when it looks that way from the outside. Especially then. And the person. They keep showing up, because that's what you do. Until sometimes, you can't. You know that feeling when something is genuinely falling apart, but everyone around it has gotten so used to the shape of the falling that it starts to seem almost normal? Almost like a system working exactly as intended? That's where we're going next. A workplace, a team, and a sick leave situation that got so far outside the bounds of what anyone had planned for that at some point. And I want you to hear how human this is, not how cruel. People started keeping quiet, informal track. Not out of malice, out of something more like recognition. The kind that makes you laugh a little and then stops you. The door's open. Come in slow. The badge reader beeped twice when it didn't recognize you, once when it did. I know this because I counted, somewhere around month 3, when the small sounds of that building had become the rhythm of my actual life. Exhale. Okay, let me back up. The company was called Vantage Solutions, which, if you've ever worked somewhere with the word solutions in the name, you already know something about what kind of place it was. The lobby had a mission statement printed on brushed steel, empowering people, delivering results, and a coffee machine in the break room that had been broken since February. It was October when I started. I'm doing the math on that so you don't have to. My desk was on the 4th floor, east side, which meant afternoon sun directly in your eyes if you forgot to pull the blinds, which I always forgot. I had a small cactus named Gerald, a mouse pad that had started peeling at the corners, a sticky note on my monitor that said check in with Dana regarding Q3 that I never threw away because I kept thinking I'd actually do it. I was a project coordinator, which meant I made sure other people's work was formatted correctly and submitted on time, and I smiled during the meetings where they got credit for it. My manager was a man named Paul. Paul was the kind of person who used the word synergy without any trace of irony. He scheduled 8 a.m. check-ins every Monday. He called them alignment sessions, where we would sit across from each other in a glass-walled conference room, and he would ask me how I was tracking on my deliverables. While I held a cup of coffee, I hadn't had time to drink yet. Paul had a system. Most of his systems were fine. One of them was not. The attendance tracker. It lived on a shared drive that the whole team could see, which I think was intentional. Color-coded, green for present, yellow for remote, orange for partial day, red for absent. I don't know who designed it, but they had built something that functioned in practice like a public scoreboard. You could see, at a glance, who was struggling to show up, and everyone could see you seeing it. I learned about the sick leave policy the way most people learn about policies like that. Not from the handbook, which I had technically signed, but from the moment I needed it. We got 5 days, 5, per year, which sounds like something until you realize that 2 of those were supposed to cover doctor's appointments, and one of them I'd already used in January when there was a pipe situation in my apartment, and I had to be home for the plumber. So by the time autumn came around, I had 2 days left. 2 days of official permission to be human. The rest of it, anything beyond 5, came out of your paycheck, not PTO, not a bank you'd built up, just subtracted, quietly, like they were doing you a favor by letting you be sick at all. I want to tell you exactly what it felt like the morning I knew I couldn't go in. It was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I remember thinking, of all the days, because Tuesdays were when I ran the weekly status report, and if I wasn't there to run it, it would either not get done, or Paul would do it wrong, and then ask me to fix it from home anyway. I had a fever of 102.4. I know the number because I took my temperature 3 times, convinced the thermometer was lying to me. It was not lying to me. I was sitting on the edge of my bathtub in the dark. I hadn't turned the light on yet because the light felt like an accusation, and I was doing arithmetic in my head. If I stay home, I use my last sick day. And then what? What happens in December? What happens if something actually goes wrong? If I go in, I sit under those fluorescent lights for 8 hours with a fever and pretend to be a person. I went in. I made it until about 11:15. I remember because I was in the middle of a spreadsheet, vendor invoices, column after column of numbers that kept swimming slightly when I looked at them. And I realized I couldn't tell if the spreadsheet wasn't loading or if it was just me. It was just me. I pressed my palm flat against the desk to feel something solid. My coworker, a woman named Simone who sat 2 desks over and had a habit of bringing in homemade granola that she shared with nobody, looked at me at some point and said, quietly, "You look like you're about to pass out." Not unkindly, just factually. The way you tell someone their tire looked low. "I'm fine," I said. She gave me a look that said she knew I wasn't fine, and then she went back to her screen because what else was she going to do? I went to the bathroom, the single-stall one down by the copy room that nobody used because it smelled faintly of toner. I sat on the closed lid and put my forehead against the cool metal of the toilet paper dispenser, and I stayed there for a while. You know that feeling when your body is saying something very clearly, and the rest of your life is saying the opposite, and you're just stuck in the middle of that, trying to negotiate, trying to figure out which one you're allowed to listen to. I called Paul from that bathroom. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. I told him I needed to go home. I told him I had a fever. I told him I was sorry about the status report. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, but can you send me the vendor file before you head out? It'll only take a minute." It took 45 minutes. I did it from the bathroom floor. I went home. I slept for 14 hours. I came back Thursday, still not fully right because I had used my last day and I couldn't afford another. The email from HR came the following Monday. It was politely worded. Everything from HR is politely worded. It said that my attendance had been flagged for review like I was a suspicious package, and that they wanted to schedule a brief conversation to ensure I had the support I needed going forward. I read it 3 times. I kept getting stuck on that phrase. The support I needed. Like the problem was that I hadn't asked correctly. Like there was a form I could have filled out that would have made my immune system eligible for coverage. The conversation was with a woman named Christine from HR. She had a very calm voice and a lanyard that said people and culture on it, and she told me gently that she understood being sick was difficult, but that the team needed consistency, and that if I anticipated any ongoing health concerns, there were options available to me that we could explore together. I asked what those options were. She mentioned FMLA, which requires 12 months of employment, and I'd been there 9. She mentioned the Employee Assistance Program, which offered 3 free therapy sessions and a discount on a meditation app. She mentioned that I could speak with my manager about flexible arrangements. I nodded through all of it. I said, "Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate you walking me through this." I don't know why I thanked her. I think it was just what my mouth did while the rest of me was somewhere else entirely. Paul and I had our alignment session the next Monday. He didn't bring up the HR conversation. He asked me how I was tracking on my deliverables. I told him I was on schedule. He said, "Great. Let's make sure we keep that momentum going." I looked at the attendance tracker on the shared drive that afternoon. My row had 2 red squares in it. Everyone could see them. I stared at them for a while. Then I pulled the blinds down against the afternoon sun, which I never remembered to do, and I opened the vendor spreadsheet, and I went back to work. Gerald the cactus died sometime in November. I'm not sure exactly when. I just noticed one day that he was brown and a little soft at the base, and I thought, and I put him in the trash by the copy room on my way to the bathroom. I didn't replace him. I still work there. That's the part I wasn't sure how to say. I still badge in every morning. 1 beep if it doesn't recognize me, 2 if it does. And I still sit at the east side desk with the peeling mousepad. And I still run the Tuesday status report. I have 3 sick days in my bank right now. I check the numbers sometimes, the way you check the gas gauge on a long drive through nowhere, when there are no stations visible, and you're not sure how much farther you have to go. I'm very careful now about not getting sick. Exhale. I'm very careful. There's something that stays with you after a story like that. Not the details, the feeling. That specific exhaustion of watching something you were part of slowly come apart at the seams and not being able to do anything except witness it. I let out this long breath when I finished reading that one, like I'd been holding it without realizing. And you know that thing where something finds you at exactly the wrong moment? You're just scrolling or clicking around, not looking for anything in particular, and your stomach does this small, quiet drop before you've even fully registered what you're seeing. That's where we're going next. There's a document on my laptop I've never deleted. I don't open it anymore, but I know it's there, sitting in a folder I named MISC because I couldn't bring myself to name it what it actually was. It's 11 pages long, single-spaced, and it contains every note I took during the 4 months I watched Cornerstone Community Services quietly dismantle the people who kept it alive. I started at Cornerstone 3 years before any of this happened. Fresh out of a master's program in social work, 26 years old, absolutely certain I was about to do something that mattered. The office was on the 2nd floor of a converted row house on Delmar Avenue, the kind of building where the radiators knocked every morning like they were trying to tell you something. The walls had these framed photographs of the neighborhoods we served. Real photographs, not stock images. families at the community garden we'd helped fund, kids at the after-school program on Kings Highway, an older man named Mr. Aldridge who'd gone through our housing stability program and was photographed on the porch of the apartment he'd kept for 2 years running. I used to walk past those photos every morning on my way to my desk. My desk was in the corner by the window that overlooked the parking lot, and every day at 9 o'clock I made a cup of coffee, the cheap stuff, the powder creamer, and I sat down and I pulled up the case management system and I checked in on whoever was on my caseload that week. It was never glamorous. It was a lot of phone calls and a lot of paperwork and a lot of sitting with people in moments they'd rather forget. But I believed in it. I believed in the people I worked with, and I believed in the organization. And maybe that sounds naive now. Maybe it was. But I think you have to believe in something to do that kind of work, or you'll burn out before your first anniversary. The person I trusted most at Cornerstone was a woman named Delphine. She'd been there 11 years. She ran our community outreach program, which sounds like a simple thing until you understand what it actually meant. Delphine knew every partner organization within a 15-mile radius. She knew which shelters had beds on which nights. She knew the name of the woman at the food bank who'd slip an extra bag to a family if you called ahead. She had relationships with people that had taken a decade to build, and those relationships were the connective tissue of everything we did. Without Delphine, half our referrals fell apart. And she knew it. Not in an arrogant way, in a quiet, matter-of-fact way, the way you know something that's just true. There was also Marcus, who handled our volunteer coordination. 31 years old, ridiculous laugh, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. He'd built our volunteer base from about 40 people to nearly 200 over 4 years. He ran orientations on Saturday mornings and somehow made them feel like something worth showing up for. These were the people I worked alongside. These were the people I thought about when the word cornerstone meant something good to me. The first time I heard the word restructuring, it was in a staff meeting in October. Our executive director, a man named Gerald Foss, used it the way people use words when they've practiced them in private. Carefully. With a kind of deliberate vagueness that's almost its own language. He said the organization was entering a strategic realignment phase to better position us for our next funding cycle. He said some roles would be evolved to reflect the organization's shifting priorities. He said it would be a process, and that leadership was committed to transparency. He did not say anyone's name. He did not say what evolved meant. I remember looking across the table at Delphine during that meeting. She had her hands folded in her lap and she was watching Gerald the way you watch someone you're trying to understand, and her expression didn't change. Not once. But after the meeting, when we were walking back to our desks, she said to me very quietly, "That man has never once said a hard thing directly in his life." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said, "Do you think it's serious?" And she said, "I think it's already decided. I think we're just watching them announce it slowly." I told myself she was being cynical. I wanted her to be wrong. She wasn't wrong. The document started circulating in November. Not to the full staff, to department heads first, and then in pieces, the way you share bad news when you're hoping people will absorb it gradually instead of all at once. What I eventually pieced together, through conversations, through a copy Marcus slid across my desk one morning without a word, was this. Cornerstone was eliminating the community outreach coordinator position entirely. Delphine's position. They weren't calling it an elimination. The memo. And there was a memo. 3 pages. Single-spaced, with a lot of language about integration and cross-functional collaboration. Described it as a role consolidation. The outreach functions would be absorbed into the existing case management team, which meant us, which meant people who already had full caseloads and no existing relationships with half the partners Delphine had spent 11 years cultivating. Marcus's role wasn't being eliminated. It was being reclassified. Volunteer coordinator became community engagement specialist part-time. His hours were cut from 40 to 24. His benefits eligibility was gone. The memo never once used the word people. It talked about positions and functions and resource allocation. It was 3 pages long, and it described the dismantling of two human beings' professional lives without ever acknowledging that human beings were involved. You know that feeling when you read something and your brain keeps sliding off it like it can't quite accept what it's seeing. I read that memo 4 times. I kept thinking I was misunderstanding it. I kept looking for the part where it explained how this would actually work, how 20 case managers were supposed to absorb a decade of outreach relationships in addition to their existing responsibilities. That part wasn't there. Quiet laugh, not the funny kind. The part that was there was a timeline. Effective January 1st. 6 weeks away. I spent a week trying to figure out what to do. I want to be honest about that week because I think it matters. I want to be honest about the fact that my first instinct was not courage. My first instinct was to keep my head down and hope that someone with more authority than me would say something. I told myself that Delphine would push back. I told myself that the department heads would raise concerns in whatever meetings I wasn't invited to. I told myself that this was above my level, that I didn't have the full picture, that maybe there was context I was missing. I was doing what people do when they want to help, but are more afraid than they're willing to admit. I think about that now. I think about the specific texture of that fear. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just this low, constant hum of what if I say something and nothing changes and then I've made myself a target for nothing? That fear is so ordinary. That's what makes it so effective. By the second week, I couldn't keep quiet in my own head anymore. I started writing things down, which is where those 11 pages came from. Notes on conversations. Questions I didn't know how to ask. A list of the community partners I knew Delphine had relationships with and what I understood about each one, which turned out to be embarrassingly little. I drafted an email to Gerald 3 times. Each time I deleted it. The 4th time I sent it, it was careful. Maybe too careful. I said I had some concerns about the implementation timeline and whether the case management team had the capacity to absorb outreach functions without a transition plan. I asked if there was a process for staff input before the changes were finalized. I was so careful with every word. I read it back to myself twice to make sure I hadn't said anything that sounded like an accusation. Gerald responded in 4 sentences. He thanked me for my concern. He said leadership was committed to a smooth transition. He said there would be a staff meeting in December to address questions. He said he appreciated my dedication to the mission. 4 sentences. 48 hours to write 4 sentences that said nothing. I sat with that email for a long time. Long pause. I kept reading it like something new was going to appear between the lines. The December meeting happened. Gerald talked for 40 minutes. He used the word exciting 11 times. I counted because I needed something to do with my hands. There was a slide deck. The slides had the organization's logo on them and phrases like sustainable growth and impact-centered restructuring, and a graph that showed projected volunteer engagement going up, which would have been more reassuring if Marcus hadn't told me the previous week that he was already interviewing somewhere else. I can't live on 24 hours, he'd said. We were in the parking lot. He wasn't angry when he said it. That was the part that got me. He just sounded tired. I have a kid, you know. I can't do this for the mission anymore if the mission can't do basic math. At the December meeting, there was a Q&A portion. I had my notes. I had specific questions about the transition plan, about partner relationships, about caseload capacity. I asked one of them. About capacity? Gerald said the team was talented and resilient, and that he had full confidence in our ability to adapt. I looked around the room. Nobody else said anything. Delphine wasn't there. She'd taken a personal day, which I only understood later. I didn't ask my second question. I'm still not sure why. Maybe because the first answer had been so perfectly, smoothly nothing that I understood suddenly that there was no version of this conversation where the questions mattered. The decision had been made in a room I was never going to be in, by people for whom Delphine was a line item and Marcus was a staffing inefficiency. Maybe Delphine had been right from the beginning. January 1st came. Delphine's last day was December 29th. She brought in a tray of her aunt's tea cakes and left them on the break room table with a little card that said, "Thank you for 11 years. Not to leadership. To us. to the people at the desks. I ate one of those tea cakes and I couldn't finish it. She sent me a text 3 weeks later. She'd found something, a director position at another organization across town. Better pay, she said. She sounded okay. I think she was okay. But I also think about what it cost her to leave something she'd built over 11 years, and I don't think that cost shows up anywhere in Cornerstone's budget projections. Marcus left in February. His replacement, a part-time volunteer coordinator, 22 years old, very eager, completely untrained, lasted 4 months before she left too. The outreach functions that were absorbed into our caseload, they weren't absorbed. They atrophied. The partner relationships that Delphine had spent a decade cultivating started to thin out because we didn't have the time or the history to maintain them. We were already at capacity. We had been at capacity before any of this happened. Adding outreach to our responsibilities didn't expand our capacity. It just meant everything got done a little worse. I'm still there. I'm still at Cornerstone. I still walk past those photographs every morning. Mr. Aldridge on his porch, the kids at the after-school program, the families at the community garden. I still make my coffee at 9 o'clock. I still open the case management system. Maybe you've been there, in a place that still looks like itself from the outside, but something essential has shifted and you can feel the absence of it even when you can't name it exactly. It's not dramatic. It's not a moment. It's more like a slow leak. The kind you don't notice until the room is already cold. I don't know what I should have done differently. I've thought about it enough that the question has worn smooth, like a stone you carried too long. I sent the email. I asked the question. I watched it land and disappear and leave no mark. The document is still in the folder on my laptop. The one I named MISC. I think I keep it because deleting it would feel like agreeing that none of it mattered. And I'm not ready to agree to that yet. I have to take a breath here, because where we're going next asks something different of both of us. There's a particular kind of ache that doesn't live in the chest. It lives somewhere lower, somewhere older. The feeling of having existed somewhere that kept moving without you, like you were never quite load-bearing. You know that feeling when you realize someone saw you, really saw what was happening to you, and made a choice about what to do with that? And the choice wasn't you? That's where we're going. Not the harm itself, but the silence that came after it. The person who knew and kept knowing quietly while you kept showing up. If you need a moment before we begin, take it. The day I found out I was making coffee, not even my own coffee. I was making it for the whole office because it was Thursday, and on Thursdays at Callaway and Brink. That's the firm. A mid-sized logistics company on the 4th floor of a building that always smelled like damp carpet and someone else's lunch. On Thursdays, whoever got in first made the pot. It was an unwritten rule, one of about 40 unwritten rules that I had memorized within my first 2 weeks, because that's what I do. I learn the rules, I follow them. I make myself useful and quiet and easy to have around. I had been doing that my whole life, actually, but I didn't understand that yet. My name is Renata. I was 26 when I started at Callaway and Brink, 28 when everything I'm about to tell you happened. I had the same desk for 2 years, second from the window in the open plan section, next to a fake ficus that someone had stuck a small paper sign on that said Harold. I don't know who named it. I never asked. By the time I thought to ask, it felt too late, like asking the name of a song after you've already heard it 100 times. The office had this particular sound in the mornings. The HVAC system clicked on at exactly 7:42. I know because I was almost always there by 7:30, and I would count the minutes sometimes, just to have something to count. The elevator had a bell that rang twice on our floor, once going up and once going down. The printer in the corner jammed on every third job, and whoever unjammed it always sighed loud enough for the whole room to hear, and everyone else always pretended not to notice. It was ordinary. Completely beautifully ordinary. I needed ordinary so badly back then. I was coming out of something at home. I'm not going to name it the way a doctor would name it because I don't think that's what this is about. What I'll say is this. For most of my mid-20s, there had been a person in my life who made me very small, very careful, very practiced at reading the temperature of a room before I said a single word. and by the time I came to Callaway and Brink, I had just barely started to leave that behind. I was still flinching at raised voices, still over-explaining myself in emails, adding 3 extra sentences to say, "I'm sorry if this is wrong. Please let me know. I can redo it. It's no trouble." Still wearing the same 2 cardigans on rotation because I hadn't figured out yet that I was allowed to take up more space than that. You know the version of yourself that exists right after something bad? When you're technically fine, but you're still braced for impact? That was me. And then there was Donna. Donna Figueiredo, Operations Director. She had this habit of tapping the side of her coffee mug twice before she took a sip, every single time, like a little private ritual. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and always took them off when she was about to say something serious, folding them in one hand while she looked at you with the other. She had a phrase she used constantly, let's be honest about it, before she gave feedback, before she made a decision, before she started any meeting that was going to be hard. Let's be honest about it. I loved that phrase. I collected it the way you collect something you've never had enough of. She had been at the company for 11 years. She knew where every body was buried, metaphorically speaking, and she had the particular authority of someone who had earned their position without ever having to perform it. She didn't need to be loud. She didn't need to fill a room. She just held it. You felt steadier near her. She was the reason I stayed past the first month. She was the reason I started staying past 5 o'clock. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. She was the reason I stopped apologizing at the end of every email. She told me once, on a Tuesday in November, that I was the sharpest analyst she'd managed in 5 years. She said it the same way she said everything, directly, without decoration, like it was simply a fact she was reporting. I went home that night and sat on my kitchen floor and cried in a way I hadn't cried in a long time. Not from sadness, from something else. From the feeling of being seen accurately. I want you to hold that. I want you to remember that I loved her. Because what comes next only hurts as much as it does because I loved her. The day I found out was a Thursday in March. I'd gotten in early, 7:28, 2 minutes ahead of the HVAC, and I was in the break room running the coffee when I heard the printer jam in the corner. Classic, third job, like clockwork. And the person who usually handled it, a guy named Marcus who sat near the window on the far side, wasn't in yet. So I went over. The jam was deep in the back panel. I crouched down, pulled the panel open, and there was the crumpled page stuck in the feed. I pulled it out and I was going to throw it away without looking at it. Because that's the polite thing, you don't read someone's printing. But my name was on it. My name. And then another name. And then a date from 3 years before I ever walked into this building. I want to try to explain what happened to my body in that moment, because my brain was not available yet. My hands went cold. Not figuratively. I mean, the actual temperature of my fingers dropped. I could feel it. The paper felt loud somehow, like it was making a sound I couldn't hear. The room didn't change, but I stopped being in it the same way. I was crouching on the floor of a corporate break room holding a jammed printout, and I was reading my own name next to the name of the man who had spent 2 years making me very small, and I was reading a note in Donna's handwriting. Her actual handwriting. I knew it from every annotated report she'd ever handed back to me. That said, spoke with H.R. Renata's previous employment record. Flagged history. Recommend monitoring. Do not escalate unless she discloses. Do not escalate unless she discloses. I stayed crouched on that floor for, I don't know, long enough that my knees started to ache, long enough that the coffee finished brewing and I could smell it from where I was. I kept reading the line. I kept trying to find the version of it that meant something different. Flagged history. She had known. Before I ever introduced myself, before I ever told her about the cardigans or the emails or any of it, she had already read something about me in a file, and she had decided that the right response was to watch and wait. Not to ask, not to say, "Hey, I know a little about where you came from, and I want you to know you're safe here." Just to know, and to say nothing. You know that thing where you look for the charitable explanation first? Where you love someone and so you build the defense for them before they even know they need one? I did that. I stood up, I folded the paper, I put it in my cardigan pocket, And for the next 3 hours, I sat at my desk and I thought about every reason Donna might have had that made this okay. She was protecting the company. She was protecting me in her way. She didn't want to make me feel surveilled. She was waiting for the right moment. She didn't know how bad it had been. She was just doing what HR protocol required. I built her a very thorough case. I'm good at that. I've had a lot of practice making things that hurt me seem like they were actually fine. By noon, the case had collapsed. It collapsed the way things collapse when you're being honest with yourself. Not all at once, but in pieces. First one wall, then another. Because here's the thing I kept coming back to. The thing I couldn't argue away. She had known for 2 years. 2 years of let's be honest about it, and you're the sharpest analyst I've managed. 2 years of watching me over-apologize in emails, and never once saying, you don't have to do that here. She had the information. She had the access. She had the authority. She had, I believe, the genuine care for me. I don't think that was fake. I won't let myself believe that was fake. And she had said nothing. Not because she didn't know, because she had decided that not knowing officially was easier than knowing out loud. The anger, when it came, didn't come in a wave. I always thought anger came in waves. Movies made me think that. But the real thing, the real anger, the kind that lives in your chest and doesn't have a voice yet, it arrived slowly, like water rising in a room. Quiet at first, almost unnoticeable. And then you realize the floor is wet, and then you realize the water is at your ankles, and then you realize you have been standing in it for hours, and you are very, very cold. I remember Marcus came over at some point and asked if I'd fixed the printer. I said yes. He said thanks. I said no problem. We had that entire normal human exchange, and the whole time, the water was at my shins. I did not confront Donna that day. I want to be honest about that. I went home. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. And I did not cry, which surprised me. I just sat there with my hands in my lap thinking about all the times I had thanked her. All the times I had thought, this woman saved me a little. All the times her steadiness had been the thing that got me through the week. And I thought, she did save me a little. That part was real. And she also held something that belonged to me, something private and painful and mine. And she folded it into a file and labeled it monitor and never gave me the chance to decide what to do with it myself. Both of those things were true. I couldn't make one of them go away to make room for the other. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've had someone in your life who was genuinely good to you in real and important ways, and also failed you in a way that doesn't cancel out the good but doesn't disappear either. And you find yourself standing in some weird middle space where you're not allowed to be fully grateful and you're not allowed to be fully angry, and you don't know what you're supposed to do with all of it. That's where I was. I went back to work the next day, and the day after that. I made the coffee on Thursday. I unjammed the printer when Marcus wasn't in. I answered Donna's emails with the same professional warmth I always had, because I didn't know yet what I was going to do. And until I knew, I needed to keep the world from noticing that anything had changed. 3 weeks later, I asked to meet with her. Just the two of us. Her office, door closed, the late afternoon light coming through the blinds and those long stripes that made everything look like an old photograph. She took her reading glasses off before I even started talking, folded them in her hand. She already knew something was coming. I put the paper on her desk. I'd been carrying it for 3 weeks. She looked at it for a long time, and then she looked at me, and she said, I thought you were handling it. Just like that. I thought you were handling it. And then quieter, like she was trying to give it more weight. I didn't want to make you feel like a case. I sat with that for a moment. I looked at her, and I said, very calmly, in a voice I did not know I had yet, you made me feel like a secret. She didn't have an answer for that. I watched her not have an answer for it, which was its own kind of strange, because Donna always had something to say. That was the whole thing about her. She always knew what to say. And sitting there watching her not know, I felt two things at exactly the same time. A grief I hadn't expected, and something else. Something quieter, something that felt if I had to name it, like the first edge of being done being small. I left Calloway and Brink 4 months after that. Not dramatically. I gave full notice. I trained my replacement. I said goodbye to Marcus and to Harold, the ficus, and to the printer that jammed on every third job. Donna and I were professional and careful with each other until the last day. On my last day, she stopped me by the elevator. She started to say something. I saw her start to say it. And then she stopped. She just put her hand briefly on my arm. And I let her. Because she had been real to me. And that was real. The elevator bell rang twice. I got in. I've thought about that paper a lot since then. The one with my name on it. The one she had read and filed and decided to carry alone instead of bringing to me. I don't think she was a bad person. I genuinely don't. I think she was a person who saw something uncomfortable and chose the option that required the least courage. And I think she told herself it was kindness. I think she believed that, actually. I think the story she had about herself was that she was protecting me. The thing about silence is, it always has a reason. The person keeping it always has a reason. And sometimes the reason is even a good one, or at least a human one. But the reason doesn't change what the silence costs the person it lands on. It cost me 2 years of not knowing I was allowed to say something. 2 years of thinking my history was invisible when really it was just filed, managed, monitored from a careful distance by someone who cared about me, and also somehow could not find the words. I still make coffee on Thursday mornings. Old habit, different office now. And sometimes, when I'm standing there waiting for the pot to finish, I think about that break room. The HVAC clicking on at 7:42. Harold the ficus with his little paper sign. The sound of the elevator bell, once going up, once going down. I think about the version of me who was so grateful to feel safe that she didn't notice she was still being kept. And I think she deserved someone who could be honest about it. She really did. That last one, something about that one is still just sitting on my sternum. There's this specific kind of betrayal. Not the loud kind, not the kind that yells or slams doors, but the quiet kind. The kind that looks like paperwork, like policy. Like someone deciding that knowing something terrible about you and choosing not to move was somehow the neutral option. Like silence was the same as clean hands. It wasn't. You know that feeling when you realize the person who was supposed to be in your corner was never actually in the room? Not the dramatic version of that. Not the movie version. Just, you're replaying something ordinary. A meeting, a performance review, a hallway conversation. And somewhere in the middle of it you think, they knew this whole time. They knew and they looked right at me. And they just kept going. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing you shake off. If you're carrying something like that tonight, something someone saw and chose to step around, I just want you to know that the stepping around says everything about them. Nothing about you. Some people get handed authority they were never built to hold. And the rest of us figure that out the hard way.